is the breakfast. This is the month that we celebrate the life of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. It is so hard to believe that if he had lived, he'd be 81 years old. Dr. King, 81. For all of us, though, he will forever be 39. Forever young and forever filled with the energy of the young, but with the passion and wisdom of one who is much older. This man we remember, this man we honor today, whose life we celebrate, was born in January 1929 and felled by an assassin's bullet in April 1968. It's been almost 42 years since we lost someone that I consider to have been a catalyst for change, a change agent, and that's what we're talking about a lot today, change. But I can tell you from talking to people, a lot of people didn't appreciate him in 1968 and before. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. got a lot more prominence. He got a lot more recognition after he had died from some of us than when he lived. So I'm going to talk a little bit today about missed opportunities and what we need to be doing if we really want change. I'm sure there are a lot of us who, maybe a little bit older than me, who wish that we had paid closer attention, that we had done more to support him while he was here. Some of us who look back on those missed opportunities. Now, we don't have the power to go back and get involved personally with Dr. King. We're living in the present. But here today, we can pledge that in this age of Obama, that we won't be looking back at any missed opportunities, at any of the things that we could have done, we could be doing to help assure that this president is successful. Now, we can do that by using what Dr. King's life and what his death should have taught us. That is, that we can make a difference in our own lives and in the lives of others when we pledge to do what we can, when we can, while we can. Dr. King taught us that we can make this world a better place, but we can't just pray about it. We have to do something about it. And like Dr. King, we need to be change agents. Now, I'm going to get a little bit into history because we have a lot of young people here, and a lot of our young people don't really know all of their history. Now, I was born in 1948. Don't mind telling my age. At the time of my birth, government-sanctioned segregation was the law of the land. I was born and raised in Mississippi, and at that time, only 1% of black people in the state of Mississippi were registered to vote. So during the time that Dr. King lived, he worked to change those things. We went from total segregation and government-sanctioned discrimination to enactment of laws that gave us the right to vote, laws that gave us equal access to public accommodations, laws that ordered integration of our schools, laws declaring equal opportunity. And yes, these were laws that Dr. King fought for, marched for, protested for, and eventually died for. But Dr. King did not accomplish these things alone. He had a lot of people working with him, some anonymously behind the scenes, laying the foundation, carrying the load, working for the cause. Dr. King and all of those with him, they were not about complacency, they were about action. During Dr. King's short life, we went from denial of the right to vote to mass registration and the subsequent election of African Americans to our Congress, mayors, legislators, and even district attorneys. Dr. King would be enormously proud that there is now at this time in America a president who looks like him, who looks like us. But in 2010, Dr. King's life and history should teach us that we can't have a missed opportunity when it comes to working with this president. During Dr. King's life, African Americans went from the back of the bus to driving the bus. We went from appealing to the courts of justice to sitting on the highest court of the land. But the justice we have now is not the Thurgood Marshall that we had. And unfortunately, not enough of us own the hotels, the restaurants, and all of those places which denied us admission in the first place. Now, we're hearing a lot about change these days, but sometimes change is not good. We saw change in Massachusetts just last week. We don't want negative change. We want positive change. We want change that moves us forward, not change that moves us backwards. We need everybody working together to be the kind of change agent that Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was. As early as 1957, Dr. King knew that change was inevitable, but he also knew that individuals must act to speed up change in the right direction if we wanted change to happen. Dr. King had already assumed the role of change agent. He knew where we needed to go. Now, we live in a different time now, and people would say that we have fewer problems. We have unique problems now. They're today's problem. They're vastly different from those faced by our ancestors, but they're problems nonetheless. We can travel thousands of miles from one continent to the other in a matter of hours by air or a matter of seconds through fiber optic cables and satellite imagery. We don't need to be in the same room or on the same continent to spread propaganda and hatred or to incite violence through fiery words. In the year 2010, we have cars in most driveways. We have widescreen televisions, Blackberries, iPhones, navigation devices, and computers in not enough homes, but in a lot of homes. We tweet our daily activities to strangers, and we renew friendships through Facebook and email. And we say things to people across that internet that we would never say to their face. We have become desensitized to common courtesies and respect. Now, in 2010, we have 24-hour instant news. And our ideas, and you're not one of those talking heads I'm talking about, Stan. Our ideas and opinions are shaped by talking heads too often, not by careful analysis and thought. That's 2010. In 2010, the dropout rate for African American men, I'm told, is 70%. Brown versus the Board of Education was decided in 1954, but today our schools in many areas from the inner city to Appalachia are still segregated and definitely not equal. We don't teach our children the importance of education, but we leave it to television, movies, and video games to do our teaching for us. Too often we allow gangs to take the place of families in the lives of too many of our children, and we're not even outraged when we see our children being abandoned by parents who are addicted to drugs, incarcerated, or just plain indifferent. We see apathy, hopelessness, fear, anger, I know Ann sees it all the time, and outrage on the faces of children who have been used, abused, neglected, or who witness violence on the streets and in their homes. And we turn away. We look away. we do nothing. If we have learned anything from Dr. King, it is that we must be catalysts for change. If we want to determine what change is, we must be change agents. We must be the change we dream about. And we can't be blinded by our fears and our prejudices. Fear is a strange thing. Fear can paralyze you if you let it. And a lot of times I hear people tell me, Mrs. Jessamy, I don't want to do something with this child over here because you never know what children will do. They could come in and rob you and assault you. Fear keeps us from acting. But it's going to take courage to change things. It's going to take courage to change our reality to conform with that dream that Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. had. Now, part of my upbringing in Mississippi, having seen a lot of things, I have been motivated all of my life to change the state of affairs. The way I was raised in a community where you picked cotton, but my parents valued education. They taught us that education was the key. That was the way to get us success that we needed in life. So as a result of that, this has shaped what I do in my life and in my work. So in my office, I talk about the three-pronged approach to crime because we can't just lock people up if we don't work to prevent crime. We can't just ignore that rehabilitation, redemption, recovery, and all of those things are important. So I have to deal with treatment and early intervention in addition to that law enforcement side. I bring young people into the courthouse and courthouse tours because I know they need to know their history, and I introduce them to Clarence Mitchell Jr. I introduce them to Thurgood Marshall. I introduce them to Pat Jessamy. I introduce them to judges like Judge Johnson. I introduce them to their history. And I tell them 4 things. I tell them that education is the key to success. I tell them that they have to make good choices, that they are already role models, and whether they know it or not, their younger brothers and sisters are paying attention to what they do and watching them. And will do what they do, even if it's wrong. I talk to them about self-respect. And the last thing I tell them they must do is be of service to others. That they can never have the attitude that I got mine, now you get yours. And that they should never be comfortable until everyone around them has what they need. I have a bereavement center that deals with people who are suffering loss as a result of homicide. I help tutor young people in a program we have called Partnership for Learning. We're dealing with all kinds of different things through our Family Violence Center and our Child Abuse Center. These are things that a change agent would do. If we want to live in a colorblind, gender-neutral, safe, healthy, literate environment, it's not going to happen on its own. If we want to reverse the statistics that are negative, we can't just pray for change. We must be the change. If we want to ride through East Baltimore and West Baltimore and not see boarded up houses, but thriving communities, we are the ones who have to make it happen. Now, Dr. King knew that we can't act alone. We need government to help us. Dr. King, in his presentation to Lincoln University in 1961, stated that government is not the answer to the present crisis, but it is an important part of the answer. Morals can't be legislated, but behavior can be regulated. The law can't make an employer love me, but it can keep him from refusing to hire me because of the color of my skin, end quote. If we want Dr. King's dream to be a reality, if we want change, we must work to make change happen, but we also must demand that our government respond to the needs of all the people and not just to the prejudice and fears of some of the people. We must, in a nation that is the envy of the world when it comes to resources and wealth, ensure that all people, regardless of their color, have equal access to these riches. It's now 2010 now. I'm going to teach a little bit of history. We have a lot of things happening right now. There is a saying that goes around and it says, what would Jesus do? Have you heard it?
Oh, yeah.
As I was trying to get this presentation together, and I was thinking, what would Martin do? I asked, what would Martin do? He would pay attention to what's happening around him, and he would remind us that we need to understand what is going on. If the teabagger protest don't sound familiar to you, they should. We should learn from history and not repeat it. Did you know that during Reconstruction, the masses were galvanized to protest, but these protests were the smokescreen for anti-black sentiment? After the Emancipation Proclamation, and we know our history, blacks were freed from slavery, but it took a few years before we could pass the constitutional amendments that said we were to be treated equally. Because so many of us had been brought to these shores in bondage, this new emancipation had the possibility of putting us in the majority in many of these southern states. After we saw the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments to the Constitution passed, we began to exercise our newfound rights as freed and equal Americans. We thought we were truly free, but we did not realize that freedom is not free. We did not realize that you have to work hard every day to assure that freedom is maintained. Freedom is something that you can never take for granted. Fairness, justice, and equality and equal protection of the law, although guaranteed under the Constitution, it's not always guaranteed. These are rights that we must work hard every day to assure that they are vigorously protected. Between 1870 and 1876, the period of Reconstruction, this country saw 17 blacks elected to national office, 15 congressmen and 2 senators. The 2 senators from my state of Mississippi. During Reconstruction, public schools were created, and blacks felt that they had finally gotten to where they needed to be. They valued education even back then, but they had to raise taxes to help pay the cost of these new schools, to pay for these changes, and not everybody thought that was good. History teaches us, if we just pay attention, we can learn from this history. The protests began as tax protests, but they quickly evolved into racial violence with the emergence of the KKK. Many protesters did not want to see black freed men educated or politically active. Many felt that they were unfairly competing with black freed men for jobs. Soon, Jim Crow laws were being enacted. To promote disenfranchisement, states began to create obstacles to voting. The poll tax, the grandfather clause, the residency and literacy requirements were legislated. Blacks began to be targeted for lynchings. Progress stopped and Reconstruction died. By 1877, we had no blacks elected to any office in this country. It was 100 years, almost 100 years, before things began to change. In 2010, when the rallying cry of a large segment of the political establishment is not what's in the best interest of the country, but to do whatever is necessary to assure that this president fails, Dr. King would remind us to keep our eyes on the prize. We cannot afford to be complacent. We must remain vigilant. We need to stand up and be counted. I'm going to talk about that census in a minute. We need to rededicate ourselves to the political process. We need to make sure that our voices are heard. I'm going to ask you to do 6 things, and then I'm going to end this speech. And I think everybody in this room is already doing the first. Making our children first. Making sure that our children are our top priority. That we need to be aware of what is happening to our children. Be engaged with your children and your grandchildren. Know what they are doing. Know who their friends are. Engage with their teachers. Become a mentor. And when I talk about youth, you can be a mentor for young people and you can be a mentor professionally, because we need to prepare young people to become who we are, to fill our positions when we are gone. We need to move education to the top of our agenda. It slipped. Education is the key, but we don't value it like we should, like we did, like our ancestors did. Move it to the top. Become engaged in the political and civic process in your community. That means that if you only voted for the first time in about 25 years to vote for President Barack Obama, then we need you to continue to vote. I tell the kids who come to the courthouse, do you know who Bill Gates is? And they say, yeah, Mrs. Jessamy, we know who Bill Gates is. I said, how much money does he have? They said, oh, he got about $60 billion. I said, yeah, but he got 1 vote. It's the great equalizer. We will not be heard if we don't vote. We need to be counted. This is the year of the census. That census count determines how much money our community gets, not just from the federal government, but from the state government. It also determines who our representatives are. Senator McFadden does not. If we have these fears and all of this misinformation about what happens when we're counted, we're going to miss out again. So I want you to make sure that your household is counted, that your neighbors are counted, that your streets included, and everyone who lives on it, because we need to be counted. Vow to vote. Vow to work with the census. Volunteer to be of service in your community. And don't accept what the talking heads tell you. Think for yourself. Read, listen, and form your own opinion. When you see something wrong or that makes you uncomfortable, don't accept the status quo. Do something about it. Don't be complacent. And finally, tell your stories. That's how our history continues. Everyone has a story. Your story is a part of our history. Your children, your grandchildren, those people in your community need to know it. Tell it. Martin Luther King Jr. used to cite a poem, and I never knew who the author of this poem was. And I went to look for it, and I'm going to end with this. This man his name is William Cowper, but it's spelled C-O-W-P-E-R. He was an English poet and a hymnist. And the poem goes like this: fleecy locks and black complexion cannot forfeit nature's claim. Skin may differ, but affection dwells in blacks and whites the same. Were I so tall as to reach the pole or to grasp the ocean at a span, I must be measured by my soul. The mind is the standard of the man. Now, William Cowper, a white man, knew these words to be true. Martin Luther King Jr. knew them to be true. Our President Barack Obama, a brilliant man, knows them to be true. But until all men know them to be true, our quest for justice, freedom, fairness and equality continues. May God bless and keep each and every one of you. Thank you very much.